For 27 years, Clarence lived with the military's official verdict. His older brother, Fredrick, was a coward and a deserter who vanished from his post in 1941. The shame had settled over his family like a permanent shroud. But when a call comes from a remote oil drilling site, everything changes. An old mud-caked ammo box pulled from a dried-up quicksand pit contains a journal that promises to rewrite history and expose a truth far more sinister than desertion. What a family believes for decades can be shattered in a single moment. Let's explore the story of a brother's undying loyalty and the truth that refused to stay buried. The year was 1968. Clarence wiped the grease from his hands with a worn rag, the scent of oil and steel a permanent part of his life. At 49, he owned a small mechanic shop in a quiet corner of Ohio, a life built on predictability and routine. He found comfort in the logic of an engine. A problem had a cause, and a cause had a solution. It was the rest of life, the parts without clear answers, that wore him down. The heaviest of these was Fredrick. The ghost of his older brother lingered in the silence of his workshop, in the sad, knowing glances from the town's older residents, and in the empty space at his parents' dinner table that had never truly been filled. They had passed away years ago, their hearts heavy with the belief that their eldest son, their pride and joy, had thrown away his honor in the deserts of Nevada just as the country was steeling itself for war. The official letter from the Army had been brief and brutal. Private Fredrick had abandoned his post, stolen a supply truck, and was declared a deserter. Clarence had been a young man then, full of fire and disbelief. He knew Fredrick. Fredrick was the one who stood up to bullies, the one who worked 2 jobs to help their father, the one who wrote letters home every week, promising to make them proud. He wasn't a coward. But the Army's verdict was final, and in a time of fervent patriotism, a deserter's family was nearly as guilty as the man himself. The shame had isolated them, changing the course of their lives. Clarence had learned to keep his head down, to work hard, and to never, ever speak of his brother. But in the quiet hours of the night, he still wondered. The phone rang, its shrill noise cutting through the hum of the garage. It was unusual for anyone to call the shop so late. He answered, his voice gruff. "Clarence's auto." A man's voice on the other end was slow, deliberate, with the dry rasp of someone who spent a lot of time in the sun. "Am I speaking with Clarence, brother of Private Fredrick?" Clarence froze, his hand tightening on the receiver. No one had called Fredrick by his rank in over 2 decades. "Who is this?" "My name is Walter. I'm the sheriff down in Lincoln County, Nevada. I know this is going to sound strange, but we found something out here. Something we think belonged to your brother." Clarence's heart began to pound, a heavy, painful rhythm against his ribs. "Found what?" "It's been 27 years. An oil crew leased some old military land," the sheriff explained. "Used to be part of the training grounds back in the 40s. They've been drilling, and the ground's been shifting. Today, their rig pulled up a mud-caked ammo box from a dried-up pit. The locals used to call the area the Sinking Sands. Inside the lid, someone scratched the initials FW. Weren't those your brother's initials?" Fredrick William. Clarence felt the air leave his lungs. He leaned against the cool metal of a toolbox for support. "Yes," he managed to say. "Yes, they were." "We found a few other things in the box too," Sheriff Walter continued. "We need a family member to come identify them. Can you make the trip?" The question was absurd. Of course he could. He would have walked there if he had to. A flicker of hope, an emotion he thought had died long ago, ignited in his chest. An ammo box, after all this time. He told the sheriff he'd leave in the morning and wrote down the directions on a greasy notepad. After he hung up, he stood in the silence of his garage for a long time, the smell of oil suddenly replaced by the memory of desert dust and the faint, almost forgotten sound of his brother's laugh. The drive to Nevada was a pilgrimage through time. For 2 days, Clarence drove through the changing landscapes of America, but his mind was in 1941. He remembered Fredrick in his crisp new uniform, looking so much older than his 21 years. He remembered his last letter, full of complaints about the heat and the bland food, but also brimming with a sense of duty. He wrote about the vastness of the desert, how a man could get lost so easily. Clarence had thought it was a figure of speech. Now he wasn't so sure. He arrived in the small, sun-bleached town in Lincoln County and found the sheriff's office. Sheriff Walter was an older man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes clear and direct. He shook Clarence's hand firmly. "It's a long way to come on a hunch," the sheriff said, his expression kind. It's the only hunch I've had in 27 years, Clarence replied. They drove out to the site in the sheriff's dusty patrol car. The landscape was desolate, a flat expanse of cracked earth and hardy scrub brush under a relentless sun. In the distance, an oil rig stood like a lone metal skeleton. As they got closer, Clarence could see the area the sheriff had mentioned, a large, sunken depression in the earth, its surface a mosaic of dried, gray mud. This whole basin used to be quicksand, Sheriff Walter explained, pointing. Treacherous stuff. The Army used it for training exercises, but warned everyone to stay clear. It's been in a drought for the better part of a decade, though. First time anyone's been able to walk on it, let alone bring in heavy equipment. Near the edge of the pit sat the ammo box. It was dented and rusted, but the initials FW were still visible, crudely scratched into the metal. The oil workers who had found it stood at a respectful distance, their curiosity mixed with a somber understanding. A deputy handed Clarence a pair of gloves. With trembling hands, Clarence unlatched the rusty clasps. The lid groaned open. Inside, everything was damp and smelled of earth and decay. There were a few personal items, a tarnished silver locket with a photo of their parents, a pocket knife, and a small, worn Bible. But underneath it all, wrapped in what looked like a piece of waxed canvas, was a leather-bound journal. Clarence lifted it out. The leather was warped and stained, but it had held. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Fredrick's. "Can I read it?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sheriff Walter nodded. "Take your time, son. Take all the time you need." Clarence sat on the tailgate of the sheriff's car under the vast, empty sky and began to read his brother's last words. The first few pages were exactly as he'd expected. Descriptions of training, the boredom, the camaraderie, the relentless heat. He wrote about his dreams of returning home and helping their father expand his carpentry business. He wrote about a girl named Rose he'd met in town. Then, about a month before he disappeared, the tone of the entries began to change. October 12th, 1941. Something isn't right here. I was on loading duty today, checking manifests. A crate of brand new engine parts, meant for the motor pool, was listed as damaged in transit. I saw the crate myself. Not a scratch on it. Captain Roy told me to just sign the papers and forget it. But I saw him talking to a civilian contractor later, and money exchanged hands. Clarence's blood ran cold. He had never heard the name Captain Roy before. He kept reading. Fredrick had started keeping a secret log, comparing the official supply manifests with what was actually being shipped out. He detailed missing fuel barrels, crates of medical supplies, even tires, all marked as lost or damaged, all disappearing under the watch of one man, Captain Roy. October 28th, 1941. Roy knows I'm watching. He's been giving me the worst duties, trying to keep me away from the supply depot. He called me into his office today, asked me if I was happy with my assignment. It wasn't a question, it was a warning. His eyes, they're like a snake's. Cold and empty. I have to be careful. The final entry was dated November 15th, 1941, the day he vanished. They've assigned me a solo run, a truckload of supplies to a remote observation post. It's a strange route, takes me right past the sinking sands. Captain Roy came to inspect my truck himself. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. He watched me load the last of the crates just standing there. That's when I knew. This isn't a routine run. He's using me to move some of his stolen goods, and this is his chance to get rid of the one person who knows what he's doing. Clarence had to stop, his vision blurred by tears. He took a deep breath and read the last, frantic paragraph, the letters pressed so hard into the page they were almost torn through. He just pulled a gun. He's not going to let me leave. I'm putting this journal in my ammo box. It's all the proof I have. I'm going to try to throw it clear of the truck before he can stop me. He's talking about the sinking sands, about how they swallow everything without a trace. He's going to sink the truck with me in it. Don't let him get away with this. Tell Mom and Dad I wasn't a coward. Tell them I did my duty. Fredrick. Clarence closed the journal, the silence of the desert pressing in on him. It wasn't a story of desertion. It was a story of murder. His brother hadn't run away. He had been silenced. A wave of grief, sharp and raw as it had been 27 years ago, washed over him. But this time it was mixed with a new, burning emotion. Rage. Sheriff Walter had been watching him, his expression grim. Bad news, I take it? Clarence handed him the journal. "My brother was murdered," he said, his voice shaking, "by his commanding officer." The sheriff spent the next hour reading, his face growing harder with every page. When he finished, he closed the journal and looked at Clarence. "I believe you," he said simply. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" "We find him," Clarence said, his resolve hardening into steel. "We find Captain Roy, and we make him pay." The investigation began with a trip to the county records office, but the old military files were long gone, transferred to a federal archive in St. Louis. Sheriff Walter made some calls, pulling what strings a small-town lawman could, but the bureaucracy was a brick wall. The case was nearly 3 decades old, the records likely buried under mountains of paper. "They're not going to make this easy," Walter said, hanging up the phone in frustration. "To them, your brother is still a closed case, a deserter. Reopening it means admitting they were wrong." "I don't care how hard it is," Clarence insisted. "That journal is the truth. We just need to find the man it points to." Their first real break came from an unexpected source. Walter knew an old man in town who had served as a clerk on the base back in the 40s. They found him sitting on the porch of his small home, watching the world go by. His memory was hazy at first, but the name Captain Roy struck a chord. "Roy? Yeah, I remember him," the old clerk said, squinting into the sun. "Ambitious fella. Made a big show of being a tough officer, but none of the men trusted him. Left the army not long after your brother disappeared, as I recall. Said he had battle fatigue, which was funny, because the only battle he ever fought was with the supply manifests." "Do you remember his full name?" Clarence asked, leaning forward. The old man tapped his temple. "It's in there somewhere." "Roy Miller?" "No." "Roy Martin." "That's it. Captain Roy Martin." With a full name, Sheriff Walter was able to dig deeper. He called a contact at the Department of Veterans Affairs. It took 2 days, but the call finally came. Captain Roy Martin had received an honorable medical discharge in early 1942. His records listed a last known address in Sacramento, California. And there was one more detail. After leaving the military, Roy Martin had started a small shipping business, a business that had, over the past 25 years, grown into a multi-million-dollar logistics company. "He got away with it," Clarence said, his voice low and dangerous. "He used what he stole from the army to build a fortune." "Looks that way," Walter agreed. "And he's been living the good life while your brother's name has been dragged through the mud." "I'm going to California," Clarence said, standing up. "I have to see him. I have to look him in the eye." "That's not a good idea, Clarence," the sheriff warned. "He's a rich, powerful man now. You're just a mechanic from Ohio with a dead man's journal. He could have you arrested for harassment." "Then let him," Clarence shot back. "I've lived in the shadow of this lie my whole life. I'm not afraid of him." Walter studied him for a long moment, then sighed and grabbed his hat. "All right, but you're not going alone. I'm officially on vacation starting now. Let's go for a drive." The sprawling ranch-style house sat behind an imposing gate in one of Sacramento's wealthiest suburbs. It was a world away from Clarence's modest workshop. As he and Walter stood at the gate, a man in a crisp suit emerged from the house. He was in his late 60s with a full head of silver hair and an arrogant posture. Even after all these years, Clarence recognized the cold, confident eyes from a faded photograph he'd seen in Fredrick's things. It was Roy Martin. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Martin called out, his voice smooth and commanding. Clarence's hands clenched into fists. "My name is Clarence. I'm Fredrick's brother." For a split second, a flicker of something, shock, maybe even fear, crossed Martin's face. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of bored indifference. "I'm sorry, I don't know anyone by that name." "You knew him in 1941, Clarence pressed, his voice rising, "at the Nevada training base. Private Fredrick, the boy you murdered." Martin actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "You're insane. I think you should leave before I call the police." "We found his journal, Martin," Sheriff Walter cut in, his voice firm. "The one he kept in his ammo box. The one that details everything you did. The stolen supplies, the threats, the murder." Martin's smile faded, his eyes narrowed, darting between the two men. "That's a ridiculous accusation. A fanciful story from some deserter's diary. It proves nothing." "It proves you had a motive," Clarence said, stepping closer to the gate. And it will be enough to get the army to start digging in the sinking sands. I wonder what they'll find at the bottom of that pit, Roy." The man's composure finally cracked. A dark rage filled his eyes. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he hissed. "You come here to my home with these lies. You'll regret this. Both of you." He turned and strode back into his house, slamming the door behind him. As they walked back to the car, Clarence felt a grim satisfaction. "He's scared," he said to Walter. "He knows we have him." "He's also dangerous," the sheriff replied. "A cornered animal is the most vicious. We need to do this by the book." They drove straight to the nearest military base and demanded to speak with the Judge Advocate General's office, the Army's legal branch. At first, they were met with skepticism and bureaucracy. A 27-year-old murder accusation against a decorated captain based on a waterlogged diary? It sounded like a fantasy, but Clarence was relentless. He told his brother's story with a passion and conviction that could not be ignored, and the journal itself was the key. The details were too specific. The names, the dates, the supply numbers, the description of the base layout that matched old maps perfectly. Finally, a young, determined JAG officer, Major Allen, agreed that it was enough to open a preliminary inquiry. The first step, he said, would be to excavate the site in Nevada. 2 weeks later, Clarence stood once again at the edge of the sinking sands. This time, the area was swarming with military personnel and heavy machinery. For 3 days, they dug, pulling up tons of hardened mud and rusted debris. And then, they found it. The twisted, corroded frame of a 1920s-era military supply truck. As they carefully cleared the wreckage, they found what was left of a skeleton inside the cab. Among the bones lay a pair of tarnished dog tags. The name on them was Private Fredrick William. The discovery sent shockwaves through the military community. The evidence was undeniable. Major Allen flew to Sacramento with a team of military police to arrest Roy Martin. Faced with the recovery of the truck and the body and the damning words of Frederick's journal, the old man's arrogance crumbled. He confessed to everything. He admitted to the supply heist, to confronting Fredrick, and to shooting him in cold blood before driving the truck into the quicksand. A few months later, a small military ceremony was held at the National Cemetery. The gray sky wept a cold drizzle as a flag-draped casket was lowered into the ground. Private Fredrick was finally being laid to rest with the full honors he had earned. The officer presenting the flag to Clarence spoke of his brother's bravery and sacrifice. The official record had been corrected. The charge of desertion was gone, replaced with a posthumous commendation for uncovering corruption and dying in the line of duty. Clarence stood by the grave long after the others had left. He ran his hand over the cold, white marble of the headstone. The weight that he had carried for 27 years, the shame and the uncertainty, was finally gone. He had done it. He had cleared his brother's name and brought the truth to light. The pain of his loss was still there, a dull ache that would never fully fade, but it was no longer tainted by dishonor. He looked up at the sky, a quiet peace settling over him for the first time in a very, very long time. His brother was home. If you found yourself in Clarence's position, do you believe you would have the strength to pursue a painful truth for decades, or is there a point where letting go becomes the only way to move forward? We delve into stories of truth and consequence like this one every week. If you value narratives that explore the depths of human resolve, we invite you to subscribe and join our community of story lovers.